I'm going to line up my experts as we go through some of those text messages. Joining me, forensic psychiatrist, trial expert, witness, and columnist, Dr. Carol Lieberman. Also with us, a psychotherapist and CEO of Life Counseling Solutions, Dr. Janie Lacy. Welcome to you both. Great to have you here. I have a whole series of these exchanges, these text message exchanges between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe. These are all in the day leading up. So let's start this is January 28th, 2:33 in the afternoon. Karen, so you're not into this anymore? John, not into fighting all the time, correct. Karen, if you tell me you're interested in someone else, you will never hear from me again. You can have all the space in the world. 2:34, John, unknown content. 2:34, Karen, then stop starting with me. John, I am not answering. Stop calling. 2:34, Karen, can you please answer after how you treated me earlier? 2:35, John, redacted, is right here. 2:35, Karen, you start a rager with me out of nowhere, then tell me you're sick of fighting with me. All right. Dr. Carol Lieberman, this is referencing something happened in the morning, and now things are starting to develop here. What are you hearing in this relationship?
Well, the summary of it is, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. What is happening is, to me, it seems this is like a typical example of couples when a man starts pulling away. And it seems like John was already telling her, that he was not so interested in the relationship anymore. I mean, for example, his niece and nephew say that he asked her to leave his home several times, and she said no, she wouldn't leave. When she makes a reference here to his saying I'll give you all the space you need, makes it clear that he must have been asking her for space. I mean, this is after this event in Aruba where she thought he was flirting with someone. And then these 2 weeks before the incident, before he was killed, that is when things got worse and worse. So, this is typical of what women do. Unfortunately, it never works. But when a man starts pulling away, a lot of times women will just keep pushing, keep trying to get proof. Oh, well, you're not really going to leave me, and then the man, when he doesn't give proof, like for example, even just from the beginning when he says, she says, so you're not into this anymore. And he says, not into fighting all the time, correct. And then it gets even more distant. So she keeps getting more and more frustrated and fearful that the relationship is going to end, and more angry. I mean, more filled with rage. These texts are really very damning.
Now, the next one, this is at 2:38. Now, we just finished at 2:35 there. 2:38, Karen says, I'm going to grab a drink in a bit. Karen again at 2:38. Can you please answer? John, no, Karen. Not sure why you need to announce that you're grabbing a drink, but have fun. Then 1 minute later, Karen, seeing if you want to meet me later. So at this point, Dr. Janie Lacy, where is this now starting to go here? What do you think each side is attempting to do in this exchange?
Well, when we hear this exchange, Vinny, we know that they had a toxic relationship, because what we're hearing in these text messages are the hallmarks of a toxic relationship. We're hearing their conflict, and then we're hearing control, and then we're also hearing the competition. When we hear the competition, because now that she's saying she's going to get a drink, obviously she's saying this in some potential manipulative fashion to get some type of reaction from him. And then the control, the constant desperation that we're hearing from her when someone starts calling someone and they don't want to obviously speak to you, but you continuously call them and then asking them to answer. It's because they want to keep that conflict going. So we're hearing those hallmarks. So there's probably a lot more history here that's bringing them to this moment. And just as I heard my colleague mention, when we have either party, in this case the female, who feels desperation and then trying to make all these attempts to try to create some type of competition because they're trying to use some type of manipulative tactic to make the person answer, come to them, respond to them, and trying all these types of tactics, which obviously, agreed, never works.
So Well, let me go to the next one, and then I think I want to hear from both of you on this one. This is now at 3:40, about an hour later. Karen, okay, well, after how this morning went down, I don't think I need to be back over there with you, frustrated at how I am with these kids. Has nothing to do with drinking. 3:40, Karen, I am paranoid now that everything I do with them is problematic. So rather see you for a minute without the kids around. So it seems from this, Dr. Carol Lieberman, something happened with the children in the morning that was the genesis of this conflict, and now Karen is trying to, I guess, be alone with John at this moment. Where do you think they are in this relationship? Do they want to be together? And if they don't want to be together, why couldn't they just be apart?
Well, I think the problem is that she wants to still be together and he doesn't. He's had enough of this. Maybe part of it had to do with her wanting to have more time with him alone, rather than having the kids around too. That isn't very intimate, isn't very sexy. Perhaps it seems like he was criticizing how she was with the kids, doing something with the kids, but the kids, are really, because they have said that that was really rocky, especially in the 2 weeks before the incident, that they're not helping her side, helping her defense at all. Their comments seem to support the fact that he really didn't want her there anymore. She's not getting the hint. He kept telling her to leave the home, and she's not leaving. And now she's saying all these things to try to entice him to be with her again. Even now, get a drink. All these things that he's not feeding into it. He's not giving her the answer she wants.
And how about the dynamic here, Dr. Janie Lacy? You've got they're not married, but they've been spending a lot of time together. She's spending a good portion of the week at his place, and he's raising these two children. So how about that dynamic and how it plays in their relationship?
Well, even though they're not married, we can assume that they had attachment. They had, these ways of which they related to each other, some familiarity, some habits, all these types of things. So what I'm hearing with these children is that he probably did give her some feedback on what he probably needed or how she was around these children, which would be a good thing in a couple's relationship, especially when there's kids involved, to give someone else a feedback in the privacy of how they're showing up in that space. So for her to try to get that away, to get the kids away, would probably be more trying to convince and more trying to probably persuade his perception of her and whatever she was trying to achieve, and that's probably not lose the relationship. And this is a good case where when you are leaving a relationship, you have to make it very clear and very plain when you don't want to be with someone, because sometimes when there's this attachment and connection with each other, there can be these opportunities where people can still try to get in there and make something happen when obviously he probably didn't want that to happen.
5:02, John. So are you staying home or coming here? And I believe at this point he's going to the bar. Karen, waiting to see what you end up doing. I don't want to hang out at the house too much, like I said. So at this point he's at the house. 5:04, Karen, I think it's clear me around with the kids around is slowly killing our relationship, and our relationship is much more important to me. How about that, Dr. Carol Lieberman?
Yes, that's a no winner. She's trying to get more of his attention. She doesn't want him giving so much attention to the kids. She wants more of that attention. And, he loves the kids. And so that is not a winner. That is always something that's going to be, it's interesting because they've been dating for 2 years. And so this wasn't a problem or as much of a problem earlier on, but apparently now she wants more and more of his attention, or he's giving more of it to the kids. But that's not going to go over. There's no way, that's not going to endear herself to him.
January 28th, 7:41 now. We jump ahead a little while. John, we are heading to McCarthy's, which is the bar in downtown Canton. Karen, okay, let me know if you end up leaving. John, why? Now you're not coming? Karen, I'm waiting for the plumber. I actually think he's in the driveway. 7:42. 7:43, John, We're taking Mike's car, so I'm relying on you for a ride home if he leaves. Then I want to read one more. At 8:32, Karen, I'd like to know if I can take a hot shower here if I need to. John, figured you'd be in Canton till Monday. John, I'm getting off my phone. Let me know what you're doing. 8:33, Karen, I think the four of us together is toxic to this relationship. Would like to limit it. What do you think of that, Dr. Janie Lacy?
Yep, I'm hearing that control and I'm hearing that competition with the children, because if she's making it about the children, and this is a father who's trying to do his best job and he loves his children, the best thing that she can do is try to create a cohesive, calm, peaceful place as she really wanted the relationship. So I'm hearing manipulation. I'm hearing a lot of confusion. So I'm hearing her making all these types of decisions, and it sounds like he's getting confused because there's some level of her trying to manipulate a situation to be alone with him and get away from the children, which in this situation was probably not in her best interest, especially if this is a father who deeply loves his children and she's coming into their life. The best bet would have been to embrace that versus try to create this competitive competition, me or them dynamic, especially for this father.
So these are all the back and forth leading up to when they're at the bar together. And Dr. Carol Lieberman, we've been watching this video of them at the bar, and there seems to be no indication of any problems. Like, she walks into C.F. McCarthy's, he puts his arm around her, she's smiling. They both seem happy, comfortable with each other. What should we make of that? The fact that when we here comes Karen, she's walking in, John sees her, comes over, get a drink, put my arm around your back. It doesn't seem like there's that tension that we're sensing in the text messages.
Well, I think that they're both trying to, hoping that maybe they could just put some of those arguments aside and try to make the best of it, hoping that it'll be different, when really it isn't different. And the kids aren't his biological children, right? They're his sister's children, and she died and he adopted them or became their guardian. So he has a special connection to them, that he went out of his way to take care of them. So I think, they're hoping, somehow this is going to work out, or at least she is. And it's just a temporary kind of lull in the problems.
All right, so these are all the text messages leading up to when they eventually leave the bar and take that drive over to Brian Albert's home. Our experts are going to stay with us. We're going to take a look at some of the communications after Karen leaves and John gets out of the car. What can we read into that?
Prior to those 4:45 a.m. phone calls, were there other phone calls that the defendant placed?
Yes.
And to whom did she place those calls and about what time?
Starting at 12:33 a.m. to 6:03 a.m., there were 53 phone calls from Ms. Reed to a phone number associated with John O'Keefe.
And in addition to those phone calls to Mr. O'Keefe's phone, what, if any, other calls did the defendant make prior to those 4:45 a.m. calls?
There were phone calls to her family members, to Jennifer McCabe, Carrie Roberts, Cameranos.
Okay, what's going on here? 54 calls to John O'Keefe starting at 12:33 a.m. Now, according to the prosecution, I believe that's going to be right after this alleged murder. She's calling him 54 times. What does that mean? Let me bring back in my experts, Dr. Carol Lieberman, Dr. Janie Lacy, still with me. Dr. Janie Lacy, what do you think is going on here? Now, there's different ways to look at this. Either she's committing the murder or she just dropped him off. So let's start with committing a murder and calling 54 times right afterwards. What does that tell you?
Well, if we go with that theory of committing the murder, then potentially there's a look to try to make it look a certain way, that she was trying to reach him and she couldn't reach him, so she's in some type of panic mode. And we can also look at that from the other side. If she really didn't know where he was or what happened, then the control of this compulsivity and this call bombing, as far as calling back to back to back, which we have seen in toxic relationships, where when you're not answering, there's this panic, there's potential abandonment that's happening, and then there's this back to back calling when the person's not even answering. So if we look at it both ways, there's probably some sense of panic. It just depends on what the intention was.
Yeah, Dr. Carol Lieberman, your thoughts about the number of calls here, and the timing is crucial, because this is right after, like moments after prosecutors say she committed this murder. She's making a series of these calls to the man that she allegedly just killed.
Well, they were drinking, presumably, in this bar. I mean, they know, actually, that was reported, that they were drinking. And so when she allegedly ran him over, she might not have been in a state where she was so rageful, so angry that he was abandoning her. I think abandonment is a big part of this. She may well have some borderline personality traits where abandonment is the big issue. But she might not have known, I don't think that she purposely ran him over. She was rageful. Rage for the abandonment plus alcohol equals running him over. So she might not have been sure what happened to him. In other words, whether he died, whether he went into the party, whether he's off with another woman. And she's still trying to reach him. She still wants to reach him, just like she in her previous messages, but now it's up a notch.
Now, let's talk about what's happening now a little bit later, 12:55 a.m. She is back at his place, right? We know that that's where she went. Karen, I'm going home. 12:55, Karen, see you later. 102, Karen, your kids are bleeping alone. And then at 104, she says, I'm back in Mansfield. The kids are home alone. Well, I don't think it's that quick of a drive, but maybe it is. But she's not back in Mansfield, and the kids aren't alone. But these are the text messages she's sending. What does this tell you, Dr. Janie Lacy? Would someone who just committed a murder, which is what the allegation is here, now start sending these types of text messages?
Well, when we look at the allegations and then we compare it to the relationship dynamic when we listen to the text messages earlier, to me, they're also in alignment of that as far as potential manipulation, right? Saying one thing but knowing the truth is another to try to provoke some type of response out of the person. So whether there was the intentionality of her murdering or hurting him, or her really not knowing what was going on, and then with the influence of alcohol and being late and all these types of things, I still hear that thread of manipulation and trying to get some type of response based off of the text messages that we heard earlier, that they were still in alignment with that type of thread that I was listening to.
Dr. Carol Lieberman, and the tone of these text messages, she uses some salty language. If you just murdered someone, why would you send text messages like this? Because these don't really cover your tracks at all. Like if you're committing murder and you want to cover your tracks, it might be, hey, hon, are you having fun at the party? Things like that. You wouldn't turn it this way, would you? If you're trying to cover your tracks of a murder that you just committed?
Well, except for the idea just in general that, I'm still able to communicate with you because you're not dead. But it is just an escalation of, it's trying to get a reaction from him, like, your kids are alone. I mean, that, you would hope, or she was hoping perhaps that he would, finally answer her, like he stopped answering her. And so, she's using the kids, thinking that, well, if he thinks the kids are alone, surely he's going to call me back. I think she was filled with rage. She was confused. She was drunk. She was desperate. And I think unconsciously, let me make it clearer, I think unconsciously, in a way, she did want him dead. She was so furious at him, and she ended up, allegedly, backing into him and killing him. Not necessarily purposely, but unconsciously doing what she kind of wanted to do because she was so angry that he was abandoning her, that he was breaking up with her.
Now, we know prosecutors are getting ready to finish their case later this week. But there was something in the Commonwealth's statement of the case that caught our attention. We didn't hear anything about it in the opening statement, but we're wondering if perhaps we hear it at the end of their case. Let me put this up on the screen because this is, and I want your take on this. The troopers recovered several voicemails from the victim's phone, John O'Keefe's phone. And these are voicemails from the defendant, Karen Reed, following the time period they were in front of the residence at 34 Fairview. This would be after the alleged murder in which the defendant screamed to the victim that she hated him. She's leaving a voicemail for John O'Keefe, allegedly saying, "I hate you," moments after committing the murder, according to the Commonwealth. What does that mean, Dr. Janie Lacy? To me, I'm trying to understand. To me, it doesn't equal murder. Like a murderer doesn't kill their victim and then call the victim's phone and say, "I hate you." Why would you do that?
Well, in these cases, when someone is completely feeling abandoned and her out of control actions, it's very common with working with couples where we see one screaming at the other, "I hate you," and because of all the stuff that's happening inside of her at this time. And, you know, it depends, right? So when we look at these situations, if we make some assumptions that in her rage and in her cloudiness and her not necessarily thinking straight because of her high reactivity, all these other types of things, there could be a potential that, like my colleague mentioned, that she could have not known what was going on. And this is what we're seeing because, to your point, there's out of order of what someone would normally do. But in this case, we're looking at all the different factors, a toxic relationship, potentially her mental health issues that someone would have to look at what was there before and how did she behave in previous relationships. But when people are out of control, it's not uncommon, in particular for women or men, to have revenge fantasies. You know, as my colleague was mentioning, unconsciously, that they want to hurt the other person. They want the other person to feel their pain because you're leaving me, you're hurting me, and they're acting irrational in these situations. And sometimes when they look back and they don't even remember certain parts of it when they're in our offices.
So, Dr. Carol Lieberman, what do you think a jury of 12 is going to think if they hear this voicemail? The allegations that have been put in front of them is that Karen Reed just murdered her boyfriend because of their soured relationship, and then after committing the murder, goes on the phone, calls him up and says, "I hate you." Do you believe that they're going to think this is like evidence of her guilt or evidence of her not having killed John O'Keefe?
I think it's like an exclamation point. You know, if we were watching this in a movie and we saw her back up into him and we knew already from the previous messages and so on in the relationship how angry she was at him, this would be the exclamation point, the final point, you know, the end of the sentence kind of thing. That, you know, like sometimes people do say that. You know, let's say people arguing on both sides of a door. You slam a door when you're arguing with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and you yell things through the door. I mean, I think they're going to think, well, that's it. That's the final statement that she did kill him.
Now, was there a motive to do all of this? I want to go back to Aruba and the testimony from Marietta Sullivan, one of the Sullivan sisters, who seemed to be the focal point of Karen Reed's issues with John O'Keefe on that trip down to Aruba. Let's take a listen.
After Mr. O'Keefe said, "Calm down, that's Laura's little sister," I said, "Hi, nice to meet you." That's when Miss Reed's head snapped up, and she very loudly told me to go herself across the lobby. And I said, "Yeah, you too," and walked away. I went straight up to my older sister, Laura, who was out to dinner with the couple the night before. I went up to her and I looked at her and I said, John O'Keefe's girlfriend? And she looked at me and said, Karen? And I said, yeah, you guys like her? She said, yeah, she's okay. And I said, well, she sucks. So my sister pulled me aside from everybody and asked if the night that I got into the altercation with Miss Reed in the lobby, if I was making out with Mr. O'Keefe.
How did you respond?
That I absolutely was not.
Okay. So taking all of this, the communications that day, do you think there was some level of motive in this case? I'll begin with you, Dr. Janie Lacy.
Well, when we hear that there was some trust issues, there were some accusations, there was probably some jealousy, right? We can make sense, if we really wanted to, that she was hurt, and in that hurt, what was her actions, and what truly was she aware that she was doing? Was there an accident, or was there truly some intentionality? But we hear that continuous theme of that toxic relationship that was getting elevated and elevated, especially if there was trust issues and accusations, and the continuation of what we heard through those text messages. So can a jury hear potential motive? Absolutely. But could that have been the case? It may not have been the case either, because we also know with toxic relationships, there's lots of different moving parts that can be escalated. It just doesn't necessarily end up with someone being deceased.
Dr. Carol Lieberman, we have about 15 seconds. Your final thoughts on motive here.
Sure. I think what we're looking at is a relationship that's been falling apart that was great perhaps in the first year and maybe even somewhat into the second year, but it was falling apart. And as it was falling apart, Karen Reed just lost it. You know, she just, the more he was leaving her, not answering her, and so on, the more she just fell apart and got rageful, and add a little alcohol to that, and you have these results.
Dr. Carol Lieberman, Dr. Janie Lacy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll see you again really, really soon.